So that story that I was going to finish with was like, I was in Switzerland last year doing a fishing trip, and we're driving down the road, and I was like, hey man, I got jet lag. So he just pulls over at this random gas station, and I get out, and as soon as I get out, this Trek van pulls up, and who steps out but Andrew Shandro. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And like the best part about it though was he looked over at me and he looked at me and he's like points at me, he's like, Hansi. And he totally remembered, like he remembered Copper Harbor. He remembered me. Like that's how mind-blowing that place was for him.
Welcome to Trail Effect. I am your host, Josh Blum. Trail Effect is a show that dives into the stories behind trails, the communities that embrace trails, and the people who rely on trails as a way of life. The goal of this show is to turn the stories you will hear from our guests into useful knowledge that can be applied to your community while providing some entertaining and inspirational content. Guests on Trail Effect include trail builders, board members, community leaders, volunteers, and regular people who really enjoy trails. For episode 166, we have Hansi Johnson. This conversation is long overdue, as I have known Hansi since 2009 when he was fresh into his former role as a regional director for IMBA. Hansi has had a ton to do with the rise of mountain biking in the upper Midwest. We covered a ton of ground during this conversation, including, but not limited to, Duluth, Minnesota, Cuyuna, Minnesota, La Crosse, Wisconsin, Copper Harbor, Michigan, along with meeting Aaron Rodgers and how that friendship sparked the start of a lot of things, and a whole lot more. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is easily one of my favorite conversations to date. For one, I knew Hansi for a long time prior to this conversation, and I had a lot of questions that I knew he could answer. Two, mountain biking in the upper Midwest is pretty dang rad, and Hansi had a front row seat for the rise of that. Cooley Creative is the title sponsor for this episode. They design and build custom websites, as well as help companies with branding, photography, and e-commerce. Cooley Creative was started in Wisconsin, but is now based out of Bend, Oregon. Jared from Cooley Creative is a friend of mine. We've traveled together on multiple mountain bike trips, and sometimes he sends it. For more information about Cooley Creative, head on over to www.dudejustsendit.com. Yes, that's right, www.dudejustsendit will get you to the Cooley Creative website, so check it out. Kettle Mountain Apparel. As we are getting closer to spring here in the Northern Hemisphere, it is time to start thinking about buying some new riding gear for the season. Some of my personal favorites at Kettle Mountain Apparel are the Canyon Bibs paired with the Skid Mark shorts and the Wayward short sleeve jersey. These are all super comfortable and functional articles of clothing that you can wear without looking like a superhero on your bike. Kettle Mountain Apparel also offers a lifetime guarantee on all of their products. By using the affiliate links found in the show notes or on the Trail Effect website, a small commission will come back to Trail Effect Podcast, which helps cover the expenses of keeping this show going. Now on to the Trail Effect with Hansi Johnson. Here we are today on Trail Effect. I have Hansi Johnson, probably one of the most requested guests on this to have on this show, and which is interesting because Hansi, whether he knows it or not, played a very pivotal role in my life when it comes to trails, and definitely played a role in why this podcast exists. Because if I hadn't have met Hansi when I did and done a lot of the things that I've done over the last decade plus of time, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. And so it's super cool to have Hansi on here. His current role is the Director of Recreational Lands with the Minnesota Land Trust. But prior to that, he was a regional director at IMBA for the upper Midwest. And that is where things really kind of convened in my trail world. And obviously what he was doing professionally at the time with IMBA is pretty awesome. So how's it going today, Hansi?
It's going great. I mean, trying to live through this lack of winter for sure. Other than that, it's great.
I've been mountain biking at least 5 times here in La Crosse in the last 2 weeks on dry dirt.
Wow. Yeah. It's going to be an interesting summer.
Yeah, it is going to be. And part of me is also worried that we're going to get like real winter in April.
Yeah, I know. I'm a little worried about that too, but I'm also in a way kind of hopeful. I mean, just for some moisture. I'm just up with you, even up here in Duluth, it's been, I think, unprecedented. Like I actually did get out and cross country ski this morning on some man-made snow here in town, but I thought to myself, it's like, nobody told me winter was canceled, like at all, like none, like it's been hard. So yeah, we're going to need it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this or not, but I do work part-time at the local ski hill, and I have since 2000, so in one capacity or another. And we had a huge improvement in terms of like, we like tripled or quadrupled our capacity for snowmaking last summer. There's just huge investments made because it's now owned by a new family and they have the resources to do that. And had they not made those improvements, we wouldn't have had winter at that ski hill. And they're still going to go strong this weekend. And they're going to wrap it up with winter, ironically, the mountain meltdown, and have the good old pond skim and all that stuff on Sunday. So
Nice. Oh, that'll be fun. Yeah, I mean, it was just so crazy too. I mean, the lack of moisture, but also the temperature, So you must have had, I know even up here, we had like maybe 10 days of like really good snowmaking weather. So
yeah,
good for them to, have not only have the stuff to do it, but to actually have the expertise to just put it on the ground so fast.
yeah, we actually made snow a week ago because we had like 2 nights of sub 32-degree weather, and that wouldn't have been done with our old system.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, hopefully it translates to, it's good. It's certainly going to be early riding season. There's no doubt about it. I mean, everyone's just sort of licking their chops and looking at the trail, but I know the freeze thaw is still kind of going strong on our trails. We get the classic peanut butter just after, it warms up and the sun gets on it. So we're trying to keep all the eager beavers from getting out too early, but it's hard because everyone's got some pent up recreation needs at this point.
Yeah, and truthfully, like our what I call our legacy trail system at Upper Hickson, like that still is in a deep freeze thaw, but our newest trail system on Grandad Bluff, because that is all south and west facing, that's where stuff is dry. And in any year, those trails have proven to open up 2 weeks ahead of our other stuff just because of their aspect.
Yeah, just getting that sun just cooking up. Yeah, well, that's good. That'll help protect them.
So let's start out with where you grew up, because where you grew up and where I grew up is literally less than 30 minutes apart, even though we didn't know each other then. But kind of give your elevator pitch of like what the Driftless area is, because when I tell people that we have like 500 plus feet of elevation and like steep, rocky, rugged terrain, and then like, I'm not a fisherman, but like when I talk to people about fishing, like epic fly fishing and just other outdoor recreational activities that you can do in this part of Wisconsin and southeast Minnesota and northeast Iowa and south or northwest Illinois, like what that actually looks like to those that aren't from here.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because as a kid growing up, I kind of took it for granted. I was like, I didn't really travel too much around in Minnesota, specifically other than maybe up to northern Minnesota to the Lake Superior. So I was like, oh yeah, Minnesota isn't just a flat like cornfield place, like, but then at the same time, like you're saying, I mean, the Driftless is such a unique place. I mean, it literally is a spot where the glaciers skipped, like the glaciers went around it and it just left it sort of sitting there. And because of that, you have just sort of that unique, geological feature in the fact that you have all this karst limestone, but then you have the way the valleys have all sort of melted out. So you have these like really deep kind of cool, almost like, I think if they were anybody anywhere else, they'd call them hollers. We call them coulees or, valleys, whatever whatever you want to call them. But yeah, I mean, just the fact that you have like those almost like mountain-esque type of situations with these steep valleys and really amazing clear water, cold streams that come down. I lived in Vermont for a long time, and Vermont reminded me of the Driftless, it's the kind of that same sort of feel, that like really lush, just green, vibrant place. And, just the history too. I mean, for our area, I think there's just more kind of, cool history in kind of that side of Wisconsin and Minnesota as well, with all the old towns and mills. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just love it. It's like it's a place where you can be a multi-sport outdoor enthusiast too. Right. So as a kid, when I got into mountain biking, we were, able to ride up old logging roads and beat around through old farms and actually have some true descents and understand how to go downhill. But then at the same time, literally from my parents' place, I would like run out the back door and run down to the stream and go catch blue ribbon brown trout, like with nobody else around, and then the river on top of it, you throw the Mississippi in there as well. And it's just a whole nother level as far as, especially for me as a kid growing up in Winona and paddling, canoe racing, and Winona Canoe was there. So there was just lots of access to lots of water and lots of elevation. Yeah, it's just it's a unique place. I mean, I love Duluth with all my heart because Duluth has a lot of similar things, but I will be honest, like I constantly, am in my back of my mind going, I could go back down to the Driftless without any problem. And my parents are still there. And so I miss it. And I try and get down there pretty regularly.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, it's what, 4 hour, 3.5 hour, 4 hour drive at the most.
Yeah, it's about 4. Like it used to be like 5, but like now the roads are just like 53 has been improved and, it's so much easier to get down there. So yeah, it's not a hardship at all.
Let's roll into how we met. So if you remember, I don't know if you remember, you might remember, but we met like, I don't know, you maybe were 2 months into your role at IMBA.
That would make sense. Yeah.
Pretty early on. I want to say it's summer of 2009, potentially.
Yep.
You came over to La Crosse for our organization was then called the Human Powered Trails, is now Aura Trails. But you came over for one of our summer festivals and you were new in the role. And let's talk about how you got into that role at IMBA and and I do want to just very, very briefly touch on this, even though it'll probably bring up PTSD for both of us, but just kind of like what you kind of got into in La Crosse, but then we're going to spin it back around to like Duluth, Cuyuna, the whole Iron Range, Copper Harbor, like all this other stuff that is like just super positive, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Man, it's a good question. So yeah, it probably was like 2009 because I started like, I want to say winter of 2008 somewhere. I know we had just adopted Tay, my son, and he was born in 2008. So it was late 2008, probably when I started. So probably that summer is when I came down and saw you guys, which makes a lot of sense. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But the way I got to the IMBA job was I spent a lifetime in the outdoor recreation industry, more around like the sales and marketing side, like the industry itself. Just having grown up in Winona and working for Winona Canoe, and that just led to working in the ski industry specifically. And then I was a Patagonia rep for the Upper Midwest for about 3.5 years as well. And when I was in the Patagonia role, they really put a lot of time into teaching us about activism and advocacy and just how to kind of be more community minded and really, learn, and actually taught us skills. Like they actually had classes on, community organizing and other things, which I really found fascinating and interesting. And at a certain point in my life in that job, I started to realize, I'm almost more interested in like getting people outside than selling things specifically. So I started to kind of drift that way and started to volunteer for our local mountain bike club here in Duluth, the Cyclists of Gitchigumi Shores. And then at one point, just randomly, I was at a trade show out in Salt Lake City at the Outdoor Retailer Show. At the end of every day of the show, there's always kind of like this social period where like everyone's sort of done selling and schmoozing, and now there's like beer sort of rolls out and people are kind of having beers at different booths. And I was walking to a booth to go grab a beer with another friend, and I see this guy in the aisle wearing a full Green Bay Packers like setup, and it's so random because it was like in Salt Lake City. I was like, Packers, man, I just started ribbing him a little bit. Well, it turned out that was Mike Van Abel, who at the time was the executive director for IMBA. And we just kind of hit it off and we're talking. And at that point, I had some involvement with IMBA. Actually, Patagonia at one point was actually a partner with IMBA and some product stuff. And so we kind of, hit it off. And at the end, he's like, hey, can I get your card? And he took my card and left. And I didn't talk to him again for probably, a year and a half. And then in 2008, I got a phone call and it was him. And he said, hey, we just got a big bunch of money, a bunch of, grant funds from Trek and Specialized and SRAM. And they were about to launch the IMBA Regional Director program at that time. And he was just like, I'm just curious if you'd be interested. And we talked and it was like, yeah, I'm definitely interested. So that's how I ended up taking the job. So it was pretty cool. And Mike, he did a lot of great work for IMBA. But the way I probably came to meet you was after I took that job, I was sort of tasked with like literally going out and meeting all of the clubs in my region. And at that point, I was doing 5 states. So I was going all the way down into Missouri. I was also in Illinois. I was in Michigan as a whole at that point. So I think I had something like 73 different clubs that I had to go visit. And sort of the idea was that we would go visit these clubs and just see where they're at. Like what are they doing? Like, what are their trail systems? Like, what kind of capacity do they have? What are their dreams? What are their aspirations? and, start to try and get them back on board with IMBA. Because at that point, IMBA has certainly gone through these different roller coaster, situations in its existence. And at that point, they were sort of reestablishing IMBA and trying to create the IMBA chapter program. You probably remember that. So it was kind of like I was reaching and meeting people, but I was also kind of ascertaining like where they're at, and then also seeing if they want to be part of the chapter program. And it was really interesting because some of them were like, we're on board, and some of them were just super adversarial. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. And at the same time, as you mentioned, man, I was like totally new. Like I had sort of some experience with, my local club, but this was a whole new world for me as well. And so it was just a really interesting time to drive around and meet all those folks. And I remember, coming down to HBT, and it was great because most of the clubs really didn't have a lot of expertise. And like HBT was like a totally different thing because you guys had way more experience than I did, and had already been doing a lot of great things. It was like between HBT and Canva at the time, like those were sort of the two groups that actually had some sort of like history and background, and had, you'd been to like HBT specifically had been to the last World Summit, and had like, they were teaching me things. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
Well, and that was right around the same time. And this is where it's going to go slightly negative, and then we're going to spin it back positive.
Yeah.
That was right around the same time. I believe it was April of 2009 that we got this like kind of cease and desist letter from the DNR to like, you guys cannot mountain bike on this property that was formerly acquired for the purpose of outdoor recreation and mountain biking. And that was all done in concert in 2007 and 8, well, 6, 7, and 8 probably, with making this region an IMBA ride center, And so we are already on track for that. And I have my own, I don't know if you want to call it conspiracy theories. I've read a lot of the documents. I think my most recent conspiracy theory is that when people started talking about IMBA Ride Center, this would have been in 2000, late 7, early 8. So before you were at IMBA, I think some other people that weren't really maybe too keen on mountain biking got really scared, almost like they're going to turn this into Disneyland of mountain bikes and we're all screwed, which wasn't the case, right? I mean, but you know how people kind of tend to overreact. And those people were in key positions at state agencies, And so like we all of a sudden had like, I can look out this window behind me that the blind is on, and I see a couple 100 acres of this public land that doesn't allow bikes, but is owned by the city, And so kind of give and I don't want to go into this too much because I really want to get into the other stuff that's awesome, but like kind of give your take on like kind of the deer in the headlights of like what you just kind of walked into.
Yeah, because you know what, it was interesting because everything comes back to money, right? Like, and at that point in time, Minnesota had just gone and passed the what we call the Legacy Fund, which was a dedicated pot of money for different things within the state, everything from arts and culture, but also to outdoor rec and trails system stuff. And so I was like deep in the weeds of learning how to access those funds. And then as HBT was going through this, I ran headlong into the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Fund, which was Wisconsin's version of it, but is way older for one thing, but way more technical as far as the different buckets of money and how you get them and what the restrictions on them were. And I don't know if you remember, but there was also was it the Mississippi River Conservancy or
Mississippi Valley Conservancy?
Yeah. And so there was,
I remember.
yeah. I forget the actual name, but so there was like, the way the money came in was part of the problem, right? Like it came in from a fund that was more restricted, unbeknownst to HBT, at least the way I was, I learned of it. And so I just remember at one point going down and meeting with Bridget from the DNR.
Bridget Brown.
Yeah, Bridget Brown. Shoot, I forgot her last name. I haven't talked to her in a couple of years, but met with Bridget, and then Bridget handed me off to like this like specialist who just worked on, Knowles Nelson stewardship. And this is just like a full on like bureaucrat, like, so here I was in Madison, like sitting in this back room with this person who, had no idea about mountain biking or anything else, but was walking me through the program and sort of like, here's how the money flows. Here's what can happen to it. Here's what, and just like drop this like stack of papers in front of me that was just like nothing but alphabet soup. I'm like, holy smokes. So I had to read through that whole thing. And I just realized man, like the challenge presented just because of the way the money flowed was substantial, and so there was certainly an advocacy fight which did go forward to try and change that, but there was also just a mountain of bureaucracy in front of it that unfortunately the Mississippi Valley folks kind of put in front of you guys, which was too bad.
And it still lives on today. Like I had one of the time when I talked to the executive director of the Mississippi Valley Conservancy not too long ago, well, a couple of years ago now, she's like, if the DNR told us that we had to allow bikes, there's nothing we could do about it. But right now they don't tell us that we can allow bikes. So we're going to say we don't allow bikes. Yeah. And to kind of timestamp that, like when you said the Knowles Nelson stewardship is older than what the Legacy Fund of Minnesota, Knowles Nelson, if I remember right, came about in like 1983, which at the time, there were mountain bikes. The Specialized Stump Jumper might have just came out, but by and large, it wasn't really an outdoor recreation activity. So why would it be included, right?
Yeah.
Anyhow, let's pivot and move on and maybe talk about how that helped you, learn about adversity in this role, and then how you could maybe parlay that into what you started to do in Duluth with the Duluth Traverse. Like, let's actually start there. Let's talk about the Duluth Traverse and how that like became a system, because you were like literally in the middle of it, and you're probably in the middle of it right now, like literally.
Yeah, literally sitting in the middle of it. Yeah, I'm less involved with it now, but at the time, so again, I sort of mentioned that I lived in Vermont, and I've left and returned to Duluth 3 different times. And 2 of the times that I left, I went to Vermont and then came back here. I was sort of like, I was stuck. I like the mountains and I like the skiing in Vermont, and I was working in the ski industry. It was based there, but I loved the mountain biking there too, which at the time was very a lot of hand built, like, just what we remember from the, mid to late 90s. And I think you actually had Katrin on one of your shows.
Katrin Maloney.
Yeah, Hardy Avery was like, her partner was a really good friend of mine, and he was starting to actually cut trail and starting to think more about mechanized trail building at that point. So this would have been 2000 era. And when I moved back, I just kept thinking, man, Duluth is such an interesting place for the Midwest, even compared to the Driftless, and the fact of it's just the way it's laid out. Like it has this, good elevation from lake to ridgeline, but it's also 27 miles point to point, east to west. So it had and it also has almost like 15,000 acres of undeveloped green space within it because of the fact that it just hadn't grown to what it was hoping to grow to in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And then also just lots of brownfield that, was old factory or resource stuff that just went away. So I just kept thinking to myself, it's like, you could connect all this just like they're doing in Vermont, and in the time like Waterbury, Stowe, Richmond, where there was just seeing these systems grow to go valley to valley and actually have these like kind of cool backcountry rides in a way. And so that thought was always on my mind. And then there was also other people who were thinking similarly in town as well. But then at one point, COGS, started to, it was obvious they were looking for more, as an organization. It was just like, what else could we do? And that sort of dovetailed right about when I took the IMBA job. So all of a sudden I went from, just being a typical trail volunteer to having this position of like being able to like not only bring home knowledge and actually go learn about all these other systems and other things that people were doing and how trail building was progressing at that point, and just seeing good examples of other success stories and bringing that home. But also starting to realize, wow, there's this whole idea of getting grants and like trail planning and like all these, things that now we take for granted. But at that point, were sort of like black magic, right? And so definitely, brought those ideas back and started talking to Adam Sundberg, who was the president of COGS at the time, and a couple other board members, Todd McFadden being one. You probably know Todd. And, just started kind of planting the dream idea. And it was interesting because the thing I learned most from that, which I brought everywhere after I learned it, was just like, it's hard to get people to dream, like everyone always says, well, they're going to tell us no on this, or they're going to tell us no on this. So like, why would we even go there? And I really was like, no, let's just do the whole dream. Like, let's just like draw it out. Let's just see, what this could be. And then we'll just go for the moon. And if we hit the stars, then great. Like we'll get something. Like right now at that point, COGS had very minimal trail that we were stewarding. We had some trail at Montauk, which is a little ski hill actually in the Wisconsin side of things. some trails in Hartley and just some, sort of bandit trails that we were kind of maintaining and building. Piedmont was just starting as well. And so, people kind of got behind it and we started to see some success. And I started bringing some of those resources like the IMBA Trail Care Crew and the mayor specifically at the time, Don Ness, all of a sudden saw a little bit of energy behind that. And again, just through what I was learning through IMBA, we came up with a really great and detailed trail proposal and sort of idea and plan. And we were able to show that to him. And it was enough to get him interested and pull us in, to some like facilitated meetings with Parks and Rec. And then Parks and Rec was like, oh, we could definitely turn this into a true plan and start to look at it. And then we started getting a little bit of funding from the city just to, kind of do some test pieces. And it just started snowballing from there. And eventually people could see the true vision and actually get behind it. And I think the thing I'm most grateful for is, I'm not as involved in it at this point, but like the future generations beyond us have really taken that plan and really fleshed it out and like built it out to its absolute, the last period in that plan, which is so great.
For those that aren't familiar, the Duluth Traverse connects how many trail systems?
Wow. So I want to say, let's see, we have Leicester, Hartley, Piedmont, Brewer, Mission Creek. So 5 trail systems. So it's kind of like
plus
5.
Spirit Mountain, right?
Yeah. And then Spirit. Yeah. Good point. On top of it from the DH perspective. So yeah. So it's almost like pearls on a necklace. So you have, a trail that goes all the way from, the west side of town and it interlinks between all 6 of those different trail hubs. And so you can live almost anywhere in town and access that trail. I think we figured out at one point that there's nobody in town that's less than 1,000 feet from the trail system at any given point, which is both awesome and also a challenge. I'm sure like anybody from COGS would also tell you, it's like, you can't really close the trails because there's like 1,500 trail access points, right? But it's interesting because, on the east and west sides, you actually have a lot less development. So you have more unbroken trail. As you get sort of to the center and the core, there's a little bit more, jumping from road to park or whatever. But even that's pretty minimal. And I know like, God, it must have been, I'm just guessing 2011, 2012, something like that. So this would be when we're about halfway through the process of it. The Bike Magazine came and did a ride across town. And it was interesting because the guys who were there had never ridden in the Midwest in general. And there was a bunch of times where they were just like, wow, this is really crazy. We're in the middle of a city, like you can hear, the traffic and everything outside, but you're not seeing it because you're so kind of in that green space and in that core. And then just like down in the Driftless and you have that elevation. So it's like, it beats people up. I'm sure you've ridden up here too, where it's like so many people will come and be like, well, that's the Midwest. It's just flat. It won't be that bad. And then they're, doing a 60 mile ride and like they're ready to be done when they're done.
Well, that and each system kind of has its own character. Like there's a huge, and what I mean by that is there's a huge amount of diversity for trail experiences.
Yeah, that's for sure. And it's kind of like we were talking about too, just that geology. It's like, really, when you're in Mission Creek and when you're in Leicester Park, what you're actually riding on is literally the prehistoric lake bed of Lake Superior. So it is just like old beach, old clay. So you have really smooth, fast riding in there and a lot of flowy, fast trails. But then when you're in the center, you're actually up on what they call the Duluth complex, which is actually the old Canadian Shield bedrock that's pushed up. So it's almost like, for boreal slick rock, for lack of a better term. So it's like really rocky and drops and, really aggressive. So, and Piedmont's where you actually, since the DT's been in, you've really seen that flourish into like more of a true, aggressive DH and enduro style riding that's going on. So there's a lot more. It's fun to watch the kids and, like my son's 16 now and he's finally just getting into like being a little more aggressive. And it's just the amount of opportunity for them, both at Spirit Mountain and at Piedmont, that's sort of like come up. So there's real technicality to some of the trails too.
It's funny you just brought up Tay, because that reminds me that still to this day, in almost every IMBA document, there's this huge smiling photo of Tay, and he was probably like 3 or 4 at the time on a balance bike.
Yeah. Yeah. He had just ridden the flow trail at Copper Harbor.
I remember that.
On a Strider.
I was there. I remember like when you brought him down, because that was, we have throughout Hansi and I, as time, we've ran into each other in various places, and Copper Harbor is a place that we would commonly run into each other at.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So it was interesting. He kind of like stepped away from riding for a while. Like he's kind of small in general. So like it took a while for him to get on bikes that were like actually light enough and had good enough components. He was kind of stuck in kid bike world for until last year, really. So now he's on a really nice like Esker Rawl, and he's just like, oh, it's kind of scaring me actually, just how aggressive he's getting. I'm kind of like, ooh. Just bought him a new full face actually.
You mix that in with some skier cross, and you're probably going to be like parent mode going, oops, I don't know if we should have introduced this stuff.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. He's teaching me now, like it's definitely at 16. I have no say in anything anymore.
Yeah. Well, I got an extensive segment on Copper Harbor, but we'll cover a little bit of other Minnesota before we go into what I call the promised land of Copper Harbor. But like kind of when you came into your role at IMBA, Cuyuna was already in its plan, like kind of late planning, early design process, so that had already launched in terms of like buy-in and whatnot, but you got to see it actually get built and unfold and become what it is today. What are your thoughts on that?
So you're totally right. Like I literally started right after they had just done like Rich Edwards and IMBA Trail Solutions had just done the actual plan, and they had done it with Tim Wegner and Jeff Schoenbauer. I don't know if you've run into Jeff. And so it was kind of an interesting mix there. And they had just done it. Like one of my first jobs was actually to go in and pick up the plan, from Jeff Schoenbauer. Like I'll never forget that. Like, same thing. Like I have no technical, at this point, planning experience whatsoever. And so just even sitting down and talking to him who had just done the plan, you're just like, okay, man, I have a lot to learn. It was like drinking from the fire hose. But, really what I ended up having to do at that point was more the community side of it. There was a small core group of folks that were actually the actual trail crew there. And they were just they had done a little bit of building on a little hand-built trail, but they needed to figure out how to grow their organization and build more capacity because they were literally being kind of leaned on as the not-for-profit partner in that project. And at the time, Mork was actually still really involved. So like Cuyuna, the crew was part of Mork at that point, which was great because Mork was such a great organization and had a lot of good experience. But at the same time, it was causing problems because there was a disconnect between the metro and the locals in Crosby. As you can imagine, there was sort of like this, we're trying to own this, but at the same time, we have these people from out of town that are kind of coming in and making changes. And so I had to kind of clean that up a bunch. And so I ended up basically, a lot of that is how I got to know Aaron Hautala and kind of pulled Hautala into it to kind of get him involved. And he really was the one that helped kind of grow that, organization to be the partner that it needed to be for the Minnesota DNR, essentially. It was interesting. Like I was like in a bunch of like meetings where I was standing up in front of a whole bunch of, local Crosby Ironton folks who I could tell you were not mountain bikers. And I had to like give these like talks and like kind of like, here's what's going to happen. And I had a lot of pushback from folks that were used to, just riding their ATVs anywhere they wanted to go. And, I found myself making these statements like, this is going to change your community, and then wondering in my head, it's like, is it really, like, is it really going to do anything? And then to actually see what it's done now. And it's like, you'd like to be able to say, yeah, I knew it was going to do that, but no, never to the extent of what it's done. And again, it just speaks a lot to the people that came in and took it, from what it was and built it out from there. As far as I like to think of the trail systems, whether it's Duluth Traverse or the trails in Copper Harbor or in Cuyuna, like they're the platform. And then, once you have the platform, there's still all this other work that has to go into, utilizing that platform and building out like what actually comes next. And so, certainly we've all seen, trail systems that have been put in and no one's done that back end work and they're just great trails with nothing else, but not in Cuyuna, man. Like they built out that trail system and they continue to build it out. And at the same time, like they've just done a great job of jumping on that economic development side of it. I still, I'll run into people who kind of poo-poo like, well, it's too easy. I don't like the riding or whatever. And I'm like, that's not the point. Like, look what it did. Like, I mean, it is built like I've told Aaron Houghton this a lot, where I'm like, you just created like the mountain bike factory. Like it just creates riders, like people come there, they get engaged, the whole family can ride. And then they have a great experience, whether it's where they're staying or where they go out to eat now and what they're doing. And, then they start to look out from there, like, where else can I go? I can go up on the range now and, go ride up at all the stuff going on, Giants Ridge, or they can come to Duluth, or they can like blast up to Copper Harbor, or, the sky's the limit, Bentonville. So, I mean, it's just amazing how to see it flourish and what it's become. So I love my mother-in-law has a place over in Brainerd near Crosby. And every time we go, Tay and I go riding, and it's just kind of shake your head like, man, I remember when this place was just shuttered up and nothing but antique stores,
Yeah. And the reality is with that, like, I think early on people are like, well, why aren't they spending money here? And it's like, well, they realized pretty early on, thankfully, that the only reason why people weren't spending money there is because nobody had anything to spend money on. And that's when the economic development part, it's like, well, if we want them to like give us money, we need to sell them something, whether that's restaurants or Airbnbs or all the other shops that have popped up because of it, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah. Now, I mean, talking to Aaron, I mean, they're definitely dealing with, the other end of it. Like there's so many VRBOs and Airbnbs that they're like trying to slow that down even to a certain point where it's like, we need some real people to be able to live here, So it's changed a lot. And it's, it's even more interesting is there's always been this divide sort of culturally between the Cuyuna Lakes area and Brainerd. And now all of a sudden you see Brainerd starting to kind of take ownership of like we're a mountain bike area, So it's like when you start to change like the neighboring communities that are, have a totally different idea of what tourism should be, which is generally kind of power sport, motorboat kind of stuff, to all of a sudden kind of promoting what you have as well. It's like, yeah, you're starting to win. So yeah.
Well, and then with Brainerd, like they could attract better talent to their community in terms of like professional careers, right? Doctors, lawyers, other people that are looking for that outdoor experience when they're not working.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's so close and so easy. I think my favorite story about that, I don't know if Aaron Houtel talked about it or not, but was the cruiser. He was a big time canoe racer, cross country skier, and he full on was I think either a science teacher or math teacher in Crosby. And like in the 80s, so like when the mines, stopped, they were just fallow. That was just like full on like, party time, whatever, lawlessness. But they did in the 80s, they had a public meeting to come up with a master plan for potential, like what to do for the Cuyuna Lakes. And I mean, there wasn't even like barely trees on the stuff at this point. And Cruiser like literally showed up and like said, I think this should be mountain biking. So like you said, like this is like probably like 1985. So like mountain bikes had just come out literally. And he was just like, yeah, I think we could do a mountain bike thing here. And there was like 3 people at the public meeting. Like nobody cared. They didn't even show up. So they just like penciled it in, mountain bikes. And then it just went and sat on a shelf, And so like when that whole Ride Center thing came by, and then, Gary Showquist and like everybody started to come up with this idea, where could we do this? They realized that was like already slotted like bureaucratically for mountain bikes. And like fully like just pulled it out. And like, I mean, just like that idea of like how important it is to like just show up and be heard sometimes, even if it feels totally hopeless. Like if he hadn't have done that, there would not be mountain biking in Crosby, and that's like the Cruiser's Kettle is sort of named after him. And that's what that whole other system is like.
So outside of Cuyuna, you then had the whole Iron Range expansion, which is Grand Rapids, Minnesota, Redhead and Chisholm, Giants Ridge, like all just kind of literally like came on the radar within a couple of years, which is probably the biggest, I don't know if explosion is the right word, but the biggest trail building explosion maybe in the country outside of Bentonville, and it might even be bigger than Bentonville, really. Like not now, but like at the time.
Yeah, for sure. And I didn't have a lot to do with that. Like, kind of the stuff that, in Grand Rapids, Coleraine or
Tioga.
Yeah. So Tioga. So like I was in on the early meetings for Tioga.
Yeah.
Some of the early talks in that.
I'll jog your brain on that because you're actually in a meeting as you're in your role in my ex or former brother-in-law's garage, Griffin.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Like he's like, it's raining out. I'm hosting Hansi at my house in the garage for a meeting.
Yeah, we did a trail care crew visit there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was, so I went to a bunch of the public meetings and just kind of helped those guys kind of get rolling. But they really, that a lot of that happened after my time. So I helped them kind of plant the seed. But then also did a lot of like site visits up around Hibbing and, what eventually became Redhead. And, checking all that stuff out with Jim Schoberg, who would be another great person for you to have on your podcast at some point. And so we, it was interesting to be cruising around with the IROC, the Iron Range off-road cyclists. It was like a couple brothers at the time who were cutting, their own trail and were super into it. And, here we are driving around with like the IRRB and like checking out all these spots. And just like my mind was just kind of blown because, you had this experience with, what was going on in Crosby and at Cuyuna, and you saw a mine pit, but a mine pit there is like, you can kind of tell it's a mine pit, but it has all these great trees and all this stuff where it's kind of like, yeah, it's a mine pit, but it's sort of like back to a lake in a way. But then when you got up into the range, it's like, those are mine pits. Like they're like, you can almost still see the tire tracks from the trucks, like just shut it down like a year ago or something. And actually Aaron Rodgers came with us one time as well. We went and checked out some interesting spots. And so most of them didn't happen, but then eventually, when Redhead came along and then just the move to, once the IRRB, which is, the Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation Bureau, once they got on board, that's when things changed. They have a specific amount of money in their fund that they can dedicate to those types of things. And, it took them a while to get on board, but once they got on board, then that's when the money started flowing. And I think there's still more to come is probably, what I've been hearing as well. And so, yeah, pretty cool to see that. And it's really great, especially as a Duluthian now, because you're kind of in this hub, where it's like, it's an hour 20 or something to get over to Cuyuna. It's about the same to get up to Tioga. It's about the same to get up to Redhead. It's not too far to get down to Kamba, and then everything that's going on the North Shore as well with Split Rock, Wilds, and Jackpot, and everything that's going on up there as well. So it's kind of like you're kind of in the sweet spot, like the conversation has changed a little bit when you run into your buddy at the bar. It's like, where did you ride today? It used to be somewhere in town. Now it's like, I headed up to, headed here or headed there. And you're like, oh, wow. It's really a lot to do, which is super cool.
Well, you brought up Aaron Rodgers, and that was going to be my next thing because you had a front row seat for like that whole show. And what I mean by the whole show is literally what we now know as modern Copper Harbor. And my first experience in Copper Harbor, a good friend of mine, Roger, for years had been trying to get me to go to Copper Harbor. I'm like, why would I go to Copper Harbor? And he found it through snowmobiling.
Oh, yeah.
And then he had met Aaron and whatnot. He's like, you got to come up. And I'm like, okay, fine. We'll come up. Labor Day weekend, there's this festival, and this is back in 2000. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll go up 2011, do the Trails Fest thing. Should be cool. And we got there on Thursday, did the group ride that they used to have from the bike shop. Aaron was leading the group ride. So this is the first time I've met Aaron Rodgers at this point. And we ride up this paved road called Brockway Mountain to get to this trail called the Flow Trail. And I'm just like, I don't even know what this stuff is. And
yeah,
like got to the bottom of the Flow Trail and my mind had, from that point forward, had totally been blown and reshaped in how I looked at trails in general. Cause I'd never seen a flow trail, even though I started mountain biking back in the 90s. Like I didn't know what machine built, purpose built trail was. We biked on trails.
Yeah.
But like, talk about, you already brought up the flow a little bit with Taya, but talk about like that whole thing unfolding, because you, through your job at IMBA, got to meet Aaron, and then the rest is history, right?
Yeah, it was crazy because like I the first time I'd been to Copper Harbor was when I was still working for Patagonia, so that would have been like 2001, and I was actually working with the Downwind guys, down in Houghton, and Downwind Dan. You probably heard about Downwind Dan. Unfortunately, he passed away, but DWD, like I was working down there and somebody was like, man, we're going to go up and go ride at Copper Harbor. And I was like, at that point, I was trying to fully rigid, I don't even remember, specialized something, and I was riding some of the trails in Houghton and someone's like, well, you should go up and ride up there. And I was like, sure. And so I went up there and just immediately realized, like, at that point, it was all the really old, this is before Aaron, like all the old school trails back that they used to have Trails Fest on. And I think I broke a wheel. Like I just got like destroyed. And I was like, man, I'm never going back there. Like that sucked, you know, it was like that kind of experience. But at the same time, it was like, what a place, you know, like just like I had been there when I was a kid in high school to go to Isle Royale, and that was the only time. And I just remember being so like interested in it. And then fast forward to that whole, you know, tour that I talked about where I had to go and meet all the different clubs, you know, all of a sudden I realized, wow, I got a club that I have to go visit up in Copper Harbor. And went up there and met Aaron. And I'd kind of heard rumors about him, you know, at that point, because everyone was talking about it. Like, yeah, he's like carrying this this gas powered jackhammer in to like, you know, hammer out some of the, you know, the rocks in the trail and stuff. And I was like, what is going on up here? Anyone who knows Aaron just knows, just, you know, he gets that evangelical look in his eye, you know, and we just clicked and connected right away, you know, and I think, you know, both as friends, but I think Aaron also saw like the opportunity to leverage what I could leverage from IMBA as well at the time. And so it was both a business relationship, but also you know, a friendship as well. Yeah. I mean, and we ended up, you know, from there, we went out to the National Bike Summit a bunch of times, you know, together and met out there and, you know, worked hard to kind of leverage the industry to get more kind of attention for Copper Harbor at that point. As Aaron's trail, you know, building progressed and he started to build things like the Flow Trail and actually kind of, you know, get into those more modern trails, then it was like he ended up working for IMBA at that point. And so he was kind of part of my Midwest team. I wasn't his boss, but he was kind of part of the, like, I like to think of him as like one of the resources I had at hand, you know, to help. So like a lot of times if I had a club that was looking to start to invest in some true trail planning and building, I could pull Aaron in and actually get some like true, you know, some true numbers on the ground and really understand the potential of that. And so, yeah, it was just fun to watch them flourish and grow, you know, and we took a couple big trips together too, where we, you know, took the IMBA car down to Georgia and went down to the World Summit when it was down there and rode like every trail system between Copper Harbor and Georgia, which literally was a lot. Like, I mean, we stopped in like Illinois and Tennessee. And I mean, it was just like, you know, North Carolina, and just had an amazing time, really just kind of like putting together, like, guys, I think it's really easy to forget, you know, like the idea of how trails are built has progressed so much just in the last 15 to 20 years. And at that point in all of this, you know, mountain biking was just coming into that. You know, it was like we were definitely, there was places that were doing some of that work, and a lot of it was in the Southeast. And so for us to go down there and kind of like sample what was going on, and it was always funny because we'd go ride something and Aaron always come back and be like, we could do that better. You know, like you always could like one up it next, like, well, no, that was pretty cool. Like it's way better than anything we got, but we could do that better, you know? And so it was just fun to watch him soak it up, and it was a hoot. So yeah. And then just to, you know, again, just like Cuyuna, see it like blow up to the point where it is now, and just how much that place has changed and what mountain biking has done for it. It's incredible.
I was going to say, so we've had some interactions in Copper Harbor. Like there's a couple of key moments that I can specifically remember that you had, whether you knew it or not, had some involvement with, you know, yeah. One of those being, you used to have a birthday party there every year because your birthday is right around Labor Day, right?
Yeah, right on Trails Fest.
And I'm kind of, where I'm going with this is like the importance of Copper Harbor and like the fact that people still don't understand what kind of place it really is because they've never been there and they don't really know why they go there. Besides, they hear people like you and I talk about this. Yeah. But like, I remember like I was at your cabin that you had rented out in front at one of your birthday parties, and all of a sudden the Northern Lights had popped.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I got to get my daughter. And so like I went and grabbed, and this is she's now 10, but I think at the time she was maybe 2 or 3. Because her first trip to Copper Harbor, she was like 7 weeks old. And so I'm like, I got to get my daughter. And so like I brought her out and we went out down by Lake Superior and got to show her Northern Lights for the first time. Like, and it's moments like that like Copper Harbor is a place, I mean, for me especially, and I'm sure for you too, that was like, it's unlike any other place. And you tell people this, they don't really get it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if Aaron Peterson told the Andrew Shandro story. Has that already been told?
Oh, you can tell it from your perspective. He did talk about it, but his perspective was he kind of had gotten brought in there as a photographer, but so he didn't really know the Andrew Shandro backstory, probably like you do. And so, yeah, you could go into the Andrew Shandro story for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting because, it started out again. This was sort of what I was talking about at the National Bike Summit with Aaron and I, like, running into all the folks from Trek and like John Burke and everyone else. And like, they kept asking like this question, like, well, what can we do? Like, other than money, what else do you need? And it kept coming back. It was like, we need more exposure. Like, we don't just need, money, like that helps, but we also need to get the word out. Like, kind of like you're saying, like, how do you extrapolate the experience that we have out to the wider world and get them to actually think it's legit, And so I kept saying, you guys have all these athletes, like do some sort of bike launch or something that would happen there. And that's how eventually this Andrew Shandro thing came around. Like that idea resonated for them. And we had done something similar at Cuyuna, actually, with Hansi and then with Eric Carter. I don't know if you ever saw the Eric Carter thing we did with him there. Like he was, mountain bike Hall of Famer and came and rode there. We did a great story out of Mountain Bike Action, which doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. But so anyway, that's how Andrew Shandro came around. And I knew who he was and I knew kind of what was going on, but I didn't know him that well. He probably get mad at me for telling this story. I actually ran into him last summer, which was crazy. I'll tell you that story in a second. But he got off the plane and I think he was a little bit upset. Like he wasn't necessarily like super stoked to be there. Like I think he was kind of like, oh God, why am I here? Like, what is this place? And I think, he was thinking what you're thinking a lot of people think, which is like Midwest. This is not my deal. Like I'm the godfather of free ride. Like, like what am I doing in the flat zone? And then just to watch how that veneer came off of them, like it started out with kind of disgruntled to like really interested to literally at one point like having a beer with them up on Sugar. What's the little cove that's sort of up outside, like when you're on the lake, there's like that hidden beach that you can hike down to. And
I'm actually not aware of that one. I know you guys were up by the old smokestack too.
Yeah. You know where I'm talking about. I'm totally spacing the name of the beach, but anyway, he was just hanging out and he was just like, this place is blowing my mind. Like he was just like, he's like, I can't really believe like what's happening here. It was like almost like his shoulders let down. Like he was kind of like, whoa, like this is a real place. This is a real scene. It's not pretentious. It's not like total. I don't have to put on these airs. Like I can just ride here and everyone's super cool. And, it was just really cool. Like to me, that really spoke to the place for someone that like had literally ridden all over the world and like every major like mountain bike destination you could go to as far as both remote and, destination. He was just like singing his praises, and so that story that I was going to finish with was like, I was in Switzerland last year doing a fishing trip and my buddy and I were in a car and I literally just gotten off the plane. Like I had maybe been in country like an hour and we're driving down the road and I was like, hey man, I got jet lag and I need to use the bathroom. I need some sugar. Like I need to like pull over. And so he just pulls over at this random gas station. And I get out, and as soon as I get out, this Trek van pulls up. And I'm like, Trek, I wonder if I know anybody, like just laughing. And who steps out but Andrew Shandro? And I'm like, are you kidding me? And like the best part about it though was he looked over at me and he looked at me and he's like points at me, he's like, Hansi. And he totally remembered, like he remembered Copper Harbor. He remembered me. Like that's how mind-blowing that place was for him. He was like coaching the World Cup team and he was just coming from Leogang and like literally driving from that spot to the next race. And that's why he happened to be on the same highway, but he still remembered Copper Harbor, all those years later. So that's pretty amazing.
Well, and I think if I remember right, that video would have been shot not long after the first iteration of Flying Squirrel was built.
Yes. It literally, I don't even know that it was 100% open yet. Like they tried to get it open for that, like that was the big push. And yeah, because I still remember those guys kind of like testing some of the jumps and stuff and not really sure how I was going to land. And Elias was like hitting it huge. And, it was pretty cool. I did shoot part of that as well. I kind of shot over Aaron Peterson's shoulder for the shoot itself too. So got some great early shots of all that.
Well, and I mean, since then, this trail isn't open. Hopefully, I mean, I know they're still working on potentially trying to figure out a way to open it again, but like downtown was also a really iconic trail, probably for Andrew during that trip.
Yeah. Yeah. He really loved downtown.
All of us did.
Yeah. I know. I even love downtown. I'm not even that aggressive a rider.
Yeah. You and me both.
Yeah. Yeah. You were riding it on fully single speed, right?
I was then. I now like, I've totally switched over to, I still have the single speed. It collects a lot of dust.
Yeah.
And my bike of choice is either the most recent iteration of the Top Fuel and the most recent iteration of the Slash, which is a lot different than the old Slash.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like, it was such an, I remember like in 2020, you know, when COVID was happening and there wasn't a Trails Fest, but we still had everything booked for Trails Fest. I went up there and I got up, you know, for Trails Fest, and I got up really early in the morning, every morning, and did laps on downtown before, you know, when it was still open, not knowing it was not going to be open after that year. And I was like, I still reflect back to that trip. I was like, holy cow. I scared the shit out of myself every single run.
Yeah.
But it was so awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, like you're saying too, you know, like it's really, you know, again, back when I was with IMBA and even now, just like thinking of like, at one point when I was with them, but one of the things that we were doing a lot of was just pulling everybody together. You know, like we would do those regional summits and pull folks, you know, all together. And, you know, we started to actually sort of market like each other and ourselves, like really looking at the Midwest as a whole, like the Great Lakes as a destination, but the Midwest as a destination as far as riding is concerned. So this is even, you know, before Bentonville really took off. And like really understanding that we were better together. But because of that, we needed to have this diverse menu of riding, you know, so you had, like we said, the mountain bike, you know, factory of people over at Cuyuna. But we also needed the scare you to death, like full on true aggressive, you know, fully, you know, free ride type of experience. And that's what Copper Harbor filled. You know, you couple that with just the fact that Aaron Rodgers, you know, became the trailblazer that he became, and how that really truly not only affected the Midwest, but really affected trail building as a whole, you know, and just, that's the thing I love looking back on is just how, when I started, we were still sort of the mountain bikers that were like, we were always in trouble. We were always like, you know, second fiddle to everything. We were fighting for everything. We were fighting more about not getting kicked out than being progressive and moving forward, to literally, you know, watching trail building itself become more intentional and reinvented, and how, you know, clubs got on that, and just how trail building changed also just as a business, and how it became more professional, and to see how it flourishes now, and just knowing that that nucleus really, Copper Harbor kicked off a lot of that. And then the Midwest as a whole kind of amplified it, and look where it's gone in general. You know, like at one point we were watching Western states coming to the Midwest to learn, because you know, their model was still Moab, you know, which was great and it was awesome, but it wasn't intentional trail building. It was totally different. Now you're seeing intentional trail built at Moab, you know, like, so it's just cool to see.
Well, and to speak on that diversity, one of the things that you would do when you went there for your birthday weekend, Labor Day weekend, Trails Fest weekend, is you would go on a long ride out to the Cuyuna Point.
Yeah.
And since then, talk about, you know, I don't know if you've been out there recently, but like, I know, you know, what's happening. And, you know, they've built Point Phase 1, which is awesome. And then they built Point Phase 2. And there's like Point Phase 1.5 in between 1 and 2. And now there's Point 1.25 between, you know, that connects basically one, you know, I'm all confused. Anyhow, it connects Point 1 to East Bluff, and then East Bluff connects over to, you know, Phase 2. But then there's also sections of Phase 3 being built.
All the way over to Keystone Beach. And like, yeah, I mean, it's
you had
like,
front row seats for that whole, like, I remember you coming back to the cabin going, oh yeah, they're going to build this whole trail system out in the point. And I'm like trying to wrap my head around that, going like, that's like, you're like in literally no man's land.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I remember like early on and all that, like, I don't know if you remember, but Aaron used to have an old like Toyota. It must have been an old Tacoma or something. It was like,
it's still there. It's
like
still sticking up as rock solid. It's still like, he still drives that thing. It gets,
oh my God, man. We used to like, you know, if it was raining, we'd just get on that thing and he would just scare me senseless, because he would just be driving at like Mach 500 on those, you know, back roads or whatever, and just like trashing that thing because it didn't matter. But then we would just park and we would just walk the whole flag line, or in his mind where he thought it was going to go. and we would just bushwhack that whole trail system. And there's so many times where I'd just be like literally out in the middle of the woods, like, dude, I have no idea where I am right now. Like, I have no context at all as to like where this is going to go or what it is. But I saw all of it in pieces. And then, yeah, just to see it all starting to come together and just their plan in general, for how you could, with East Bluff and just the whole thing. I mean, it's so big. It's just like, yeah, it's not surprising. It's Aaron Rodgers. That's how he thinks.
As an employee of his, it's kind of scary sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and Aaron will back this up with me too. I mean, there was definitely plenty of times where, at least from my IMBA role, where I had to push back on some things, where it was like, all right, like we need to do X or we need to do Y. And Aaron was like, no, we're doing Z, and I think that's a true definition of friendship, is when you can lock horns sometimes and still come back to it and just be like, but Aaron's he's always pushing, he's always probing, like he's not afraid.
It probably doesn't come to any surprise to you that Aaron and his company has grown to what it is, but like, tell that story of like going, taking the trip to Georgia, probably having conversations in the car between all these different systems, to then him working for IMBA and then, taking off with Rock Solid.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that first trip to Georgia, like, at one point IMBA had given me a vehicle. So like Subaru was sponsoring IMBA, and that was one of the things that was also funding my position. So every year we'd get a new Subaru Outback, and they're paying the expenses for it. So like that first year, I know for a fact we took the IMBA route because Aaron didn't want to pay to go down there, like it was going to be too expensive. So we were like, we just sucked off the IMBA route and went down and did it that way. But then like, after he worked for IMBA, we went down to the Santa Fe World Summit, and we drove down. And I think we took one of his work trucks at that point, because he was already starting to like make enough money and build his business big enough where we were jumping in his truck, and going down. So like things changed quickly. But no, I mean, I don't know that I knew that it would get this big. Nobody knew like the X factor of, the Walton family and Bentonville for sure, which changed everything. But I knew that he was going to get much bigger in the Midwest. And at the time, I was so thankful for it, because that's the other thing we often forget. It was like, as the trails clubs themselves grew and got more opportunity and found that they could raise money and they were getting grants and they were getting access to build new trail systems, we didn't have enough builders, And so we needed some big, we needed more groups to come on board. And I think, one thing that Aaron and I partnered on that I think a lot of people forget about too, is we put on that trail school at Spirit Mountain, which was just such a genius thing in itself too. And the fact that, we had locally been trying to get DH trails to Spirit Mountain and getting them to run the lift, but we're getting nowhere. We were denied so many times. And Aaron and I were just hanging out, having a beer one night. We started coming up with this idea, and it was like, why don't we put a trail school on? We can try and figure out how we can create more trail builders, because there's not enough. We need more pro builders. But we also could just, instead of just doing little trail, we could just say we're going to build a whole trail. And then we'll go to Spirit Mountain and we'll tell them, we'll build this whole trail for you, knowing full well that if we got that trail built, like Pandora's box was open, like they were going to see the potential of it. And, QBP got behind that. Steve Flagg ended up putting some money into it. And we built Candyland, which was that first trail. And that was literally built as just as a school trail. Like we had I don't know how many, I could look it up, but we had at least 30, 40 folks come and all lend a hand. They all got to learn. We had IMBA Trail Solutions got some like machines to come and some of the companies to actually sponsor it. So, we ended up having a bunch of mini X's and different candy coms and all the things that, you could use. And people came from as far out as like Colorado and Texas to be there. And boom, we built that Candyland in basically like a week and a half, and just a gorgeous trail. And sure enough, as soon as it was done, Spirit Mountain was already like, wow, we should build some more, like we should do a little bit more of this. And next thing you know, we had a bike park, but that was because of Aaron. And because of that too, you also had, Adam Harhu's company basically started there. I forget, I counted like at least 3 or 4 pro builders came out of that school. And it was just a success in all ways and as well. But it was great to see Aaron's group grow, because next thing you know, you could send them to Winona or, or all these other places that were starting to have access and needed some actual pro builders to do it.
Yeah. One of the topics that doesn't come up very much in conversation these days on some levels, but still continues to come up in conversation at other levels is the IMBA Ride Center. And you were kind of probably in the middle of that whole thing. I think the concept probably came about before you started IMBA, but clearly you've had, your hand in creating and helping to push some IMBA Ride Center stuff. What are your thoughts on that designation of the IMBA Ride Center and what that does for communities? And I ask that because I still have conversations today with people who are like, we want our community to become a bronze level IMBA Ride Center, or our community is a bronze level IMBA Ride Center. How do we get to silver?
Yeah. It was such just such a great tool for an advocate, especially for, a professional advocate like I was at the time. I mean, it sets milestones, it gives people goals, but really what it did was it gave the ability for local advocates to have conversations with their land managers. And that I think, I wish that it was still moving forward. I don't know what iteration it's in at this point. I know it's not as robust as it used to be, but it was amazing. Like once, like here in Duluth as an example, like once we got our city parks and recs on board with that and they understood what it was so easy for them to both plan, how to find the money for it, how to like raise money around it, how to plan the actual construction and just the management side of it. But it gave them a menu too of like progressiveness. They saw, wow, we have to have beginner trails. We have to have advanced trails. We have to have this whole menu of things. And man, if you had a really solid group of advocates with that tool in their hands and the ability to go forward, it just laid out the roadmap for people to do it. So it was super effective. I don't even think IMBA at the time understood how effective it was. And I mean, just to the point that you're still hearing people asking about it, that tells you, because it's like, and people took ownership in it too. Like there's real pride, right? Like if you are a gold level or a silver level, or you were like, yes, you're proud of that. But it also gave you this, like you're hearing, like this aspirational thing. It's like, we only got bronze this time. Well, we want to keep working, for it to get gold. So just such a great tool. And I think the problem with it was early on, and I think some of it was with HBT too, was like, it wasn't clearly defined. I think early on, it sort of grew over time. And so there was different, I think some folks had different ideas of what it was. So I know like when I started, you talked to 3 different people, there was 3 different ideas of what a ride center was. As it went on, they Chris Bernhardt at the time was with Trail Solutions, finally did sort of rein it in and put more sideboards on it and had more of a, true program behind it. But man, just when you think of it too, as a marketing tool, like it just had all aspects of it. So I think they should bring it back.
Well, that's exactly why I asked the question, because I think it should be more front and center as well. I have heard, and I'm going to truly say this is rumor because it's not been said by anybody that I know at IMBA, but I have heard rumors that they feel like they have the capacity now to start bringing it back. Cool. And so I hope that is a thing. I know, to point out the differences of what, or kind of how it was kind of translated in different ways early on, like the ride center plan for La Crosse, for example. Yeah, I have a copy of that plan. It includes Viroqua and it includes Winona. And I think it maybe even talked about Levis over, an hour and a half away. And so
it had a really big circle.
Yeah. So it was a really, that would be a regional thing where now, like, I think, and I honestly think that kind of diluted what a ride center was, in my opinion, where now it's like pinpointed at a city or a direct community like Duluth or Cuyuna or Copper Harbor or Anniston, Alabama.
Yeah. 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 It became more of a focal point and not as wide, for sure. Yeah. I still have that plan too. It was a gorgeous plan.
Someday.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I hear it too as well. Like I still hear people who will basically be like, Duluth's a gold level ride center, like they still remember it. So that's good.
For sure. Well, let's move into your role now as the Director of Recreational Lands with the Minnesota Land Trust. I guess more importantly, like, let's talk about how the Minnesota Land Trust looks at that intersection of recreation and conservation, and how those two different things, but similar things, work together.
Yeah. It was really interesting to move from IMBA to a conservation organization, but but really just understanding that, there's less and less people going outside in general. And so, and this is before COVID, obviously things have changed a little bit, but I think it's starting to slump down again, even after COVID. But, the Land Trust is really thinking like ways that we can engage different folks and get them outside and sort of like start to, push that message of conservation to all these different folks, that are doing more, just all sorts of different kinds of outdoor recreation, beyond just environmental education. Our ED at the Land Trust is named Chris Larson, who's just a huge cyclist and outdoor recreationalist himself. And so, he was really forward thinking in that. And I was actually just in a situation where I was actually, my office where I'm right now, I was actually, as my IMBA office, I was subletting from the Minnesota Land Trust to have my office in here. And so, we would have these different conversations. But then as the Duluth Traverse was going through, I was also working with the Land Trust a bunch because they had done an assessment of all the open space in the city and what, who owned what and what was county tax forfeit and what wasn't. So they were a big key player in just that early planning of the Duluth Traverse. And so at one point, Chris was just like, what you're doing is really engaging all these different folks. And you could see COGS growing, quickly, and also just getting a lot of press and a lot of exposure. So he really started having that more conversation with me around, mountain biking is one leg of the stool, but there's also cross country skiers and there's climbers and there's hikers and there's paddlers and there's surfers, like all these different things that are going on in Duluth. And so that just led to that idea of like, well, how can we engage all of them, instead of, just working specifically on one activity, how can we move that out? And then you start to really see more numbers and then more that idea of, engaging more people who can start to, protect and speak out for these places, which has really happened here. Like I had mentioned earlier, 15,000 acres of green space, most of it was county tax forfeit and could be developed or sold from the city to, from the county to developers. And a lot of that was open space that people were recreating in. And they're like, yeah, this is a park. And you're like, yeah, it is a park. That's how we treat it, but it could go tomorrow, and as that happened, we've seen more protections be put on those spots. And as the trails come in, we did some really amazing and large scale land swaps that put all that back into city ownership. So, but that wouldn't have happened had we not had a constituency that was really, excited to stand up. And we're actually about to just go through another interesting rezoning where there's some developers trying to put some trail or put some houses right up on the Duluth Traverse on the Hawks Ridge Trail. And already you can just see people getting up in arms for it, which is great, So I think finding that fine line between, development and recreation is key, but not losing that sense of place, which, for us is as a city is important, because you could quickly lose it. And then you're right, you're just riding through a housing development,
Yeah, for sure. And like, I know for me as a mountain biker, like I would know what erosion is from my former role at Wisconsin DOT, or I would know what invasive species are from my former role at DOT. But the reality is I wouldn't look at it the same way,
Yeah.
And that's where like being a mountain biker and understanding what's actually happening with our lands and going out, out there and getting outside, like that helped me become more aware of this stuff that we have that a lot of people just don't know about.
Yeah. And I think especially as, if you're involved in the trail planning and trail building aspect of it too, like you get to see all these weird little spots in your community that you didn't even know existed. Like you start to look at the topography different, or you're like, wow, I didn't even know that valley went way back there. Like there's way more space back there than I thought, and yeah, so it's been interesting. It was funny moving from mountain biking to working with all the other user groups. Because I just remember so often when in those early trips to like visiting all the different clubs from IMBA, how many of them would just be like, nah, we got this. We're independent. Like we don't roll that way. Like we don't need any help, or we're like, we're punk rock. Like we do things our way. Right. And then going to these other groups and realizing all of them acted the same way. Like the cross country skiers are the same, the climbers are the same. Like I just realized it's not just mountain bikers, it's outdoor recreationalists in general, and just, and the tools that I learned at IMBA served me well, and working with these other groups, because it was like, I'd already been through it on a much different scale. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting. One of the things this is going to resonate really close to home for you, considering the places you've lived. But one of the things that continues to come up through this podcast is like the idea of growing up in a bike town. And a lot of people can relate to that as like, oh, I live in a ski town. And like, it's kind of like a badge of honor of being able to do that. But now like people are like becoming proud of like living in bike towns. Like how would you, looking back 15 or 20 years ago in your role or your life, I mean, did you ever think that would be a thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like maybe somewhere else, like I could see like Park City being that or like, somewhere like that, but like a Midwest bike town, no. Like, and it's so funny you say that because like I was mentioning earlier, like Tay wasn't really riding a lot in the last few years. And then just like the last 2 years, all of a sudden it's like he's into it. Like Todd McFadden is the coach of the local enduro team, and like there's an enduro team, like what the hell? Like, like I mean, just the fact that there's a mountain bike team in general, I mean, which is a big change, but then on top of it, an enduro mountain bike team, and just how the kids talk about their bikes and, just the number of kids that are riding around and showing up. And you actually can be walking around in town and see somebody actually wearing mountain bike gear and clothes. Like you can just peg them, and the amount of different giant adventure vans that are showing up with, bikes on the back and just like, yeah, I never thought that it would be quite to that extent. And beyond just tourism, kind of like where you're going with it, like when we go to Cuyuna, like I kind of expect that because it's a destination, when you come to Duluth and it still looks sort of a destination, but it's also just a city and it's a town. And to see it sort of integrate right into the actual community, the actual fabric of the community is really interesting and really cool.
Yeah, it is awesome. And I'm really happy to see that IMBA, like their main initiative, is More Trails Close to Home because it does play such a vital role for having a community that's really more desirable and more livable, for all people that want to get outside, not just mountain bikers.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that's really been interesting is just how like not only COGS, which also is doing some outreach with different kids groups and stuff, but like the city itself just got a 50 bike fleet. Is doing actual kids mountain bike programming. The Adaptive Courage Duluth, which does a lot of work, has just got some motorized bikes, and like just seeing how like the programs that are like rising. There's like the the weekly women's ride is just getting huge. And just seeing how like all these sort of, like I was saying earlier, like the trails become the platform and all these other things grow off of it. Just the ecosystem that's kind of like created around it and how that's pulling more and more people in. It's like, I can't keep up with it anymore. I'm like in my role with the Land Trust, I'm less in the weeds with COGS. Like we did come up with a group called the Duluth Area Outdoor Alliance, which is a member, like an alliance of all the different kind of not-for-profits and stewardship organizations around outdoor recreation in the town. And COGS is part of that. And so most of my work is with that at that real high level. But like even today, I just dropped off a photo for the COGS galas in a week or so. And I donated a photo for the auction, and like hearing the person that picked it up, like talking about all the things that are going on, like 1 out of 5 I knew about, like it was just like, wow, like every time I turn around, there's just something else going on, and it's not necessarily around trail building. It's around all this other cool stuff that's going on. And so that just makes me super happy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm going to go into a section that is maybe one of my favorites. And I do want this to remain positive because I want to tell like, this is just something that people learn from, right? And so I call it the famous failure section. And I actually usually ask people about what they have for a famous failure, but you've actually published a famous failure of yours. And so it might actually be famous if anybody reads your blog. And we're digging back into the Wayback Machine on this.
Okay, good. Yeah, you're going to have to remind me.
You'll know this one because it comes back to lacrosse.
Okay.
And so I'm going to ask you about the time that you gave a presentation in lacrosse I'm going to say these are your words, not mine, but you say you tanked on it. I was at the presentation. I didn't think or even pick up on the fact that you tanked on it. So I don't know. I can't say that you did, but
yeah, well, that's good.
I want to talk about that famous failure in terms of like how it's helped you prepare for future presentations. Cause obviously you've gone on to give a lot more presentations and have really refined your craft and do exceptional presentations now.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and it's funny. I think was I with the mayor of Duluth at that one, or was that?
No. This was prior to you, the mayor. This is when you were with John Burke. It was downtown at the lacrosse center.
Yeah.
So this would have been 2 or 3 years prior to Don Ness coming here.
I've gone a couple times. Yeah. So yeah, I remember it was like the first time. It was at that point. Trek was a big supporter. I'm sure they still are a big supporter of IMBA. But at that point, they were putting some money into the regional director program, and I was working fairly consistently directly with John Burke. And so, but I hadn't had to do anything publicly, and I wasn't speaking. I was pretty early on, so I wasn't speaking publicly a lot. And yeah, all of a sudden to get thrown in on a panel with him and have to get up and talk. And I just remember like the blank, like where you're like up there and there's all these people staring at you. And all of a sudden there's just like nothing. It's like, I forgot what I'm supposed to say and what I'm supposed to talk about. And just literally was just like, oh my God. And I kind of struggled through it. I got through it. I remember my parents were there too. And I was just like, oh God, I just screwed that up so badly. But like you said, it made me realize I was like, I need to be more prepared. Like I need to understand what I'm saying, what my point is, be more succinct. And actually, John actually talked to me afterwards a bit about it too. And it was just like, here's what you got to do. And gave me some pointers. The best part about that is like, oh man, maybe 3, 4, 5 years later, I was driving down to Trek World and they put on their big kind of trade show at Trek. I don't know if they still do that, but I was driving down to do it. And Mike Van Abel, my boss at the time, was supposed to fly in and accept this like $75,000 donation check from Trek to IMBA in front of the whole Trek World audience, which is like 3,000 people. And as I'm driving down, I was just going to be in the audience, and I get this phone call, and it's from Jen Dice, who was like, at the time was our public relations person or government relations person. Jen calls and she's like, hey, Mike's plane is canceled. You're up. You have to go up and pick up the check and say a few words. So like unbeknownst to me, I'm now all of a sudden going to have to go up on the stage. And I mean, it was to the point where like I had just gotten done riding at Levis Mound. Like on the way down, I was like, oh, I'll just stop at Levis Mound. I'll ride there and I'll jump in the car. I'll get down there in time for the presentation. And I'm like literally in my riding clothes. And I was like, man, I don't even have clothes. So I stopped at that, like, isn't there like kind of just outside the Wisconsin Dells, there's like that.
The Tanger outlet?
Yeah, exactly. I just pulled in there and I bought like a cheap shirt and pants and then blasted down there. And the whole time I'm trying to think about what I'm going to say. I'm putting it in my mind. I pull up and I had to go in the back into this green room. And who's in the green room but Jens Voigt, the Schleck brothers, and like Cancellara.
Fabian Cancellara?
Yeah, so I'm like sitting there with those three, and then John Burke, and John Burke's like, do you know what you're gonna say? And like he's like putting all this pressure on me. And I'm like, I got this, man. Like, I'm like, I got this. And did, and went out there and accepted the check, and I just nailed it. Like, just had a really good, quick talk and pulled it off. But I was like, all right, I feel like I circled back, like, because I know he was looking at me like, I remember when you tanked. I know he was thinking that. And then went out there and didn't tank. And I was like, afterwards, I was like, all right, good. Like karma came back to me.
Yeah, that's a good story. And I'm glad you could tell that one here. And the reason why I say another reason why I say you've gone on to like give really good presentations is back in 2018, which wasn't that long ago. It was, 5 years ago now, 4 years ago now, myself and Jed Olson from Lacrosse showed up in Bentonville for the first ever IMBA Trail Labs. And we had to go to Bike Rack Brewery to pick up our stuff. And who do we run into in Bentonville at the Bike Rack Brewery is you.
Yep.
And I think you were there for a different bike related conference that was going on in Bentonville at the exact same time. And we were all like, oh, this is awesome that we ran into each other here. And then we're staying at this Airbnb that another cyclist owned. And he knew we were there for this IMBA Trail Labs thing, but he was going to the other conference that you went to. And Jed and I come back and he's like, oh man, like there's this guy he just gave this incredible speech about trail advocacy and trail related stuff. He's like, you should probably get a hold of him and meet this guy. His name is Hansi Johnson. And we're just like, oh yeah, we know Hansi.
Yeah, I think that was like it was like the first like economic like the bike economic summit or something. Like, yeah, they were just kind of kicking that off. Yeah, Andy Williamson, I think, helped put some of that on. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, it's definitely, I feel a little rusty now. I don't give as many talks, but I've had to start to do a few more recently. So I'm like kind of coming back to that, but it just made me realize how much I used to talk. Like I was in front of so many people so often, whether it was, doing presentations or at conferences or like the media in general. it's a skill that kind of like, you have to keep up for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those perishable skill sets for sure.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. But yeah, thanks.
Oh, for sure. Well, before we wrap this thing up, is there anyone you want to thank? Any topics that you wanted to talk about that I didn't bring up at all? Any other stuff?
Man, I mean, I would just say, thanks to you. Thanks for having me on. And, thanks to all the people out there that are doing all the great work in mountain biking. Like I always feel like, for a long time, I used to like just use the nickname as fire starter, just because I wasn't the one out there, burning everything, but I was the one lighting the matches. And, there's just so many amazing people out there doing so much great work. And just the fact that it's still going, like the longevity of it. And I think that was one thing that came up a lot when I was kind of early on the trail of all of this was people like, well, it's just going to be a fad. It's never going to last. It doesn't have any legs. And everyone's proven that's wrong, and the fact that it's like, it is lasting and it's just getting better. And people are maintaining all these big systems that were built, which was a big question as well. Really super proud of Cogs for that. I mean, when you have, 100 plus miles of single track in your community, that you need to keep a destination, quality like experience going. Just the fact that like people who are, for lack of a better term, 4, 5, 6 generations removed from when it actually happened are still stewarding and loving and taking care of it. Like that's a pretty cool, proud moment for mountain biking in general. And I know that's happening all over the country.
Yeah, and you just brought up a good point. I think when you started working for IMBA, it was kind of, at least the way I view it, it was kind of at a time where like, mountain biking was huge in the 90s or got big in the late 90s when from a racing perspective, you had all that outside money coming into Norba and whatnot. And then in the early 2000s, it hit this slump. And then, mid to late 2000s and the time frame that we're talking about and beyond, it kind of started taking off again. And at the same time, whether it was intentional or not, and what I mean by this is whether it was intentional or not, with trail development really started happening, but at the same time, bikes all of a sudden started getting a lot better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I think it wasn't a fad, because all of a sudden we got this second wind to really figure things out, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, bikes got better. I mean, it was funny. I was riding at Split Rock Wilds last year and I broke a chain. And I was like, in my head, I was like, when's the last time I broke a chain? Like, I'm not a single speeder. So I'm like, man, it's like, usually it's because you're riding on a crappy bike on a crappy trail, And so now you're riding on great bikes on great trails. Like the mechanical aspect of things just getting, constantly breaking down and everything else is so less, at least for me as a mainly cross country rider. But yeah, I would agree. I mean, we really did see a true revolution occur, and just both in bikes, but also in trail building. And it's, it's obviously still going on, but it's really cool to have seen and been a part of it.
Yeah, it is. Well, Hansi, I really appreciate you taking time out of your Friday afternoon to catch up on this one. This interview has been a long time coming. Like I said at the beginning, whether you know it or not, like part of the reason why this podcast even exists is because I had people like you to look at in terms of like what trail development could be, places like Copper Harbor to go to and like literally like change how I viewed the landscape. Like I still remember the first time I rode the flow trail, like I said, like it totally changed my perspective of how trails could be. And I instantly thought to myself, how do I bring that to lacrosse?
Yeah.
And I've
awesome.
since brought that to lacrosse and kind of a different form, but we've since obviously had rock solid, building here, which is in over 3 different seasons, and
yeah,
they'll probably be back in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely need to, I will be down there this summer for sure. Probably sooner than later with this winter.
Yeah, if summer happens. And, there's new stuff in Winona too, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know. And, just to kind of wrap up the way you came from the Driftless, I mean, as I was like doing that big tour around and like checking out all these places in my head, I was like, where can Midwest true destination riding happen in the Midwest? And the Driftless was like number one, in my opinion. It had everything we talked about earlier as far as elevation, but the communities, that are there and just the river towns themselves. And I don't know if you ever heard about the houseboat trip I always wanted to put on. Did you ever hear about that? I mean, for a long time, I wanted to do a houseboat trip where I started in Minneapolis and went all the way to Iowa and just rode mountain bikes at all the different destinations. And I was going to use that to kind of kick off, sort of the push for the ride center, really for the original, like the idea you guys had as far as the more regional one. It ended up not happening because it was just too early. Like there wasn't a lot of good riding yet. And so it could still happen. And I still would love to do it. But yeah, I mean, if there's a place that it can happen, it's there. It's Copper Harbor and it's Duluth, so it's cool to see that it's actually happening. And every time I go visit my parents, I do go ride that new trail already. It's a big change from the old Holzinger trails.
Oh yeah. And I remember the old Holzinger trails. I did a mountain bike race there in like 94. And I remember it just poured and like, you couldn't even move your wheels. Cause that was cantilever brakes and they're like totally full of mud.
Yeah. Cherry Bomb over in the old Cherry Bomb trails. Yeah.
Yeah. That was bad. One other, you said river, and that totally reminded me of a conversation that you had talked about years ago with me, but I look at still to this day, and especially when I was working at DOT, because I had Vernon County as one of my territories when I was doing highway maintenance, is the Kickapoo Valley Reserve. And that is still the same way that it was when you were there. But like, I look at that and I look at Wildcat Mountain State Park and I'm like, someday this place could be epic.
Huge potential. And, just the interesting fact that, you will probably never see a mountain bike trail in a Minnesota state park, but Wisconsin has put mountain bike trails in state parks. So you have that, you actually probably could in Wildcat actually see it happen. Because I know, like, I was just talking to a friend a couple of days ago who was just riding in Willow River State Park, which is kind of like across from Red Wing, sort of up in that zone. And they, I guess Wisconsin just put a new trail system in there and it's like amazing. So, but yeah, Kickapoo Reserve, like that place is like, whew.
Well, and that's not even Kickapoo Reserve isn't a state park. Technically, Wildcat is.
Yeah. Yeah. Kickapoo Reserve's isn't it Kickapoo? Isn't it tribal?
No, it's under the Department of Tourism. There is tribal lands. I will say there is tribal lands, part of it.
Okay.
Part of the Ho-Chunk Nation does have lands within those boundaries. But it really is just state property that has its own kind of government managing agency that falls under the Department of Tourism. And it was really because it was going to be all dammed up and it was going to be basically a big resort lake. Yeah. And back in the 1960s, when all that land was acquired for this big dam project, it ended up getting blocked at the federal level. And all of a sudden, there's all this public land that was acquired for a project that never came to be. And you go there today, there's still people that are pretty mad about how that happened because they might not be the direct people that got their land. I don't want to say taken because they were compensated. We don't know if they were compensated really, truly fairly.
Yeah.
That's a whole different conversation. But there are still family members that live in that area. Like this should have never happened. But at the same time, it's now 8 or 9,000 acres of public land. And it's, there's a lot of equestrian use there. There's some mountain bike use there. There's some hiking there.
Yeah.
It's in a region that is geographically and topographically and from a geological perspective, like incredible.
And that's the hard part about the Driftless in general is, I know at least on the Minnesota side, I don't know what it's like on the Wisconsin side, but it's 1% public land. So there's like almost all private lands, so to like have one giant piece of public land like that is pretty special for that zone. Yeah. So there is some huge potential right there.
For sure.
So,
well, Hansi, I'm going to wrap this one up again. We had a little bonus content there, side talk. We could probably go on forever on this stuff, really.
Yeah, for sure.
I really appreciate you coming on. It's been incredible.
Yeah, man, for sure. Stay in touch.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you've heard, please take the time to share these shows with others. Sharing these shows will help create awareness of both the guests who have taken the time to be on the show and the podcast series itself. Also, if you're new to the Trail Effect podcast, check out our ever-expanding library of episodes. If you listen to the Trail Effect podcast on Apple or Spotify, please don't forget to leave a rating and review, as this is one of the best ways to show our support for the Trail Effect podcast. Also, don't forget to check out Cooley Creative at www.dudejustsendit.com. For additional ways to help support the Trail Effect podcast, check out the affiliate links tab at the Trail Effect website, where you'll find links to Kettle Mountain Apparel, Worldwide Cyclery, and Trail One components. By using the affiliate links found at www.traileffectpodcast.com, a small commission will come back to the podcast, which will help keep this thing going. This podcast has been edited and produced by Evolution Trail Services. Thank you again for listening.